Hi there. This is Reading Zen in the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, Chapter 11, Part 1. I wake up wondering if we're near mountains because of memory or because of something in the air. We are in a beautiful old wooden room of a hotel. The sun is shining on the dark wood through the window shade, but even with the shade drawn, I can sense that we're near mountains. There's mountain air in this room. There's so many ways to discuss this book, so I guess I kind of have to choose what appeals to me. I kind of have to let quality emerge, let's just say. So I think at times I sort of go off in some directions that seem irrelevant and completely forego the glaring obvious. However, I do think the symbolism of the mountain, which figures in throughout the book, is probably a no-brainer, and it's the mountain is the high country both topographically but in other ways too, and so I want to explore that. That certainly comes up in this chapter, at least in this first part of the chapter, and again in a lot of the book. Also in this chapter you're going to see a lot of contrasts. You're going to see dark and light, hot and cold. For example, he describes the water that comes out of the taps at the mountain hotel is piping hot, and that it has to be mixed with the mountain cold water, the water that hasn't been heated, to create water that he can shave in. And remember, this is a book that was written with extreme care, so I think it's fair to say that there's not a sentence or word or phrase in this book that's arbitrary. Everything means something, and I think we need to sort of go more into the nuance of this book. Everything is so intense in this sunlight. Dark shadows, bright light, dark blue sky. The sun is bright and hot when we're in it, but when we pass under trees along the road, it is suddenly cold. So then they spend some quality time. He's with Sylvie and Chris, and they have a wonderful breakfast in town, and they sort of feel in love with everything and each other. And Sylvia does some bonding with Chris, sort of a more intimate kind of conversation. Nothing about his, mental illness is weighing heavy. They're just chatting about his life, and Chris is just a normal kid in this situation, and everything is quite normal. Sylvia says John has talked to someone in town about another route to Bozeman, south through Yellowstone Park. South, I say? You mean Red Lodge? I guess so. A memory comes to me of snowfields in June. The road goes way up above the timberline. Is that bad? Sylvia asks. It'll be cold. In the middle of the snowfields in my mind appear the cycles and us riding on them, but just tremendous. We meet John again and it's settled. Soon beyond a railroad underpass, we are on a twisting blacktop through fields toward the mountains up ahead. This is a road Phaedrus used all the time, and flashes of his memory coincide everywhere. The high dark Absaroka Range looms directly ahead. We are following a creek to its source. It contains water that was probably snow less than an hour ago. So another contrast, snow to water. We are following a creek to a source. We certainly are. We're following the train of thought. Not only are we following a route, we're following the train of Phaedrus's thought to wherever he was going with this. And the narrator is following the memories as they emerge, and the images. So as you've seen in this book, it sort of alternates between the philosophical and the Chautauqua and the narrative of the motorcycle journey. So now he's going to deepen the elaboration of Phaedrus's philosophical journey. So what was Phaedrus like? I mean, this was a genius guy. We know that. So how did he think? And how was his thinking changing? He had some pretty interesting ways of seeing things. He had already been through this discovery that the hypotheses were infinite, and that really kind of twisted him. So now he's been He's not in university anymore. He's just trying to figure it out. He's doing what he calls a lateral drift. At first, the truths Phaedrus began to pursue were lateral truths, no longer the frontal truths of science, like not pursuing them directly, those toward what the discipline pointed, but the kind of truth you see laterally out of the corner of your eye. Lateral knowledge is the knowledge that is from a wholly unexpected direction, from a direction that's not even understood as a direction until the knowledge forces itself upon one. Lateral truths point to the falseness of axioms and postulates underlying one's existing system of truth. To all appearances, he was just drifting. In actuality, he was just drifting. Drifting is what one does when looking at lateral truth. So this is something we've all been through, you're trying to figure something out. You just have to kind of go with the flow, see what happens. I mean, you can try to force it, but is that really productive? This lateral drifting is kind of an interesting way of putting it, and kind of useful to think about as something that you might do if you're really, if something isn't coming to you that you need. The drift took him into the army, which sent him to Korea. From his memory, there's a fragment, a picture of a wall seen from a prow of a ship, shining radiantly like a gate of heaven across a misty harbor. He must have valued the fragment greatly and thought about it many times because, although it doesn't fit into anything else, it is intense. So intense I've returned to it myself many times. It seems to symbolize something very important, a turning point. Okay, so contrast, turning points. This is the theme of the, at least this part of chapter 11. And again, any fragment of memory from Phaedrus is critically important because they are the memories that are going to emerge that have a real value. And he's using intentionality with these fragments to describe parts that feed into a bigger philosophical picture. Remember, we're looking for the origin of the creek. We're looking for where this all starts. Let's say ultimately the philosophy that he's trying to develop is a sea. And these are rivers, and you're noticing in Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, these fragments, all these things coming together are rivers that are going to take you to the sea. And in Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, there's a lot of metaphor and symbolism in topography. So there's another one. The wall that he sees in this fragment is it's like the gate of heaven, opening up from one world to another. Again, following the theme of contrast to a deeper duality, one where he goes from one entrenched mode of thinking, let's just say scientific thinking, to another much more dynamic way of thinking. And one thing I'd like us to notice here is the phrase, lateral truths point to the falseness of axioms and postulates underlying one's existing system of getting at the truth. That applies to any kind of switch in thinking, but this is especially interesting if you remember the ghosts in chapter 3. His letters from Korea are radically different from his earlier writing, indicating the same turning point. They just explode with emotion. He is like someone or some creature that has found an exit from a cage he did not even know was around him and is wildly roaming over the countryside, visually devouring everything in sight. So when you have a switch of any sort, it kind of is like coming out of a cage. Love that metaphor. And especially in this particular case, because, his thinking is going to be such, not only a profound switch, but a profound discovery. So a kind of strong metaphor like that is certainly apt. In Korea, he makes friends with some laborers who translate for him the way of life and thought of another culture. So he's immersing himself in Eastern culture. With his new friends, they eat a picnic lunch and talk to one another, and to him and the subject is ideographs and the relation to the world. He comments on how amazing it is that everything in the universe can be described by the 26 written characters which they have been working. His friends nod and smile and eat their food. Eat the food they've taken from tins and say no pleasantly. He is confused by the nod yes and the answer no, so repeats the statement. Again comes the nod meaning yes and the answer no. That is the end of the fragment, but like the wall, it is one he thinks about many times. So everything can be described in 26 characters? Of course, you say, but a nod in Korean means no. They nod and smile. Can you really describe reality with words? Depends on which reality you're describing, I guess. Again, don't discount anything that Phaedrus has put on paper. So I'm afraid I've been kind of glossing over, noticing this, really noticing this now. I feel like I've kind of been glossing over some stuff in these reading videos. I'm trying to keep them as short as possible, but that seems like it's getting more and more difficult. One reason I'm doing this is partially to get people interested in Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, but another big part of it is selfish. I'm trying to go over this book myself with increasing knowledge and of his work and get to know more about this book and its relationship to Lila. So I'm hoping, I imagine these reading videos are going to become more involved and hopefully more thoughtful as I go on this journey. And thanks for being here with me. The final strong fragment from that part of the world is of a compartment of a troop ship. He is on his way home. The compartment is empty and unused. He is alone on a bunk made of canvas laced to a steel frame. This is the foremost compartment of the ship, and the canvas in the adjoining frames rises and falls, accompanied by elevator feelings in his stomach. It's an enclosed space, so there is no indication whatsoever that this entire compartment is rising massively high into the air and then plunging down over and over again. He wonders if it is that which is making it difficult to concentrate on the book before him, but realizes that no, the book is just hard. It's a text on Oriental philosophy, and it's the most difficult book he's ever read. So again, the contrast, rising and falling. Could this be a metaphor for great upheaval? It probably is. I think it's interesting that he's really, again, like the caged animal, really emphasizing this massive rise into the air, massively high up into the air, and then plummeting down again. Is that a contrast of kind of being lurched out of your perception of the world, coming back into it, and then going massively high again? The book states that there's a theoretic component of man's existence, which is primarily Western, and this corresponded to Phaedrus's laboratory past, and an aesthetic component of man's existence, which is seen more strongly in the Orient, and this corresponded to Phaedrus's Korean past, and that these never seem to meet. The terms theoretic and aesthetic correspond to what Phaedrus later called classic and romantic modes of reality, and probably shaped these terms in his mind more than he ever knew. The philosophy book, which is called The Meeting of East and West by F.S.C. Northrop, suggests that greater cognizance can be made of the undifferentiated aesthetic continuum from which the theoretic arises. Okay, that's an important phrase, and if you've read Lila, that phrase is going to send a chill down your spine to see that, the undifferentiated aesthetic continuum from which the theoretic arises. I don't want to go into that, where that's going too much, because we're going to do that just in this reading series. But that's the origin. I think that really is the origin of what's going to be explored in Lila. So what we are talking about is a way of uniting, or why can't we unite opposites? This guy Northrop is saying they're united along a continuum, but how can this be possible? So you can see what's kind of obsessing Phaedrus. So he is obsessed with this book, what he's reading, what it means to his understanding of reality. And so he sits in a hotel room for days and reads and thinks and reads and thinks. So his new worldview is being formed. Here's the book. It's a library book, so it's got some stickers on it. You can open up a page, and every now and then you're just going to, I haven't obviously read it yet. It's nagging at me. But you can open up pages and you can see some of the influence in this just by glancing at some pages. And I think that great secrets are contained in this book. And it's nagging at me because the magnitude of what it's going to take to truly understand Pirsig's work is just, well, the enormity is overwhelming. You see me fumbling through this every week. And this chapter is, and this book is, you know, the discovery of this is taking it to another level. Kind of frightening, exciting and frightening. I'm coming out of my cage. A sudden cross gust of cold air comes heavily with the smell of pines, and soon another and another. As we approach Red Lodge, I'm shivering. At Red Lodge, the roads almost join to the base of the mountain. The dark, ominous mass beyond dominates even the roofs of the buildings on either side of the main street. Okay, so the alternate route that John has discovered, in which they're about to embark on, is Highway 212, Beartooth Highway. It's one of the highest paved roads in the world, and this ride will lead them from Montana through Wyoming, through Yellowstone National Park, up the mountain, through hairpin turns and twists, and they switch back on each other. And it's a truly amazing piece of technology and nature united. So maybe you could say that the Beartooth Highway is an undifferentiated aesthetic continuum. When coffee is finished, we put on the heavy clothing, repack, and have soon traveled to the first of many switchback turns across the face of the mountain. The asphalt of the road is much wider and safer than it occurred in memory. On a cycle, you have all sorts of extra room. Okay, so that's funny. So he thinks that it's safer than in memory. Why would it be less safe in Phaedrus's memory? Is that significant? Maybe it is. I think that it indicates that Phaedrus's memory is maybe more negative, maybe darker, maybe where you're going to see more danger. Who knows? John and Sylvia take the hairpin turns up ahead and then come back above us, facing us, and have smiles. Soon we take the turn and see their backs again, then another turn for them, and we meet them again, laughing. It's so hard when contemplated in advance and so easy when you do it. So that's kind of interesting. That's a great way of describing it. When you look at how it's configured, that's exactly how it would be to ride on there. So I'm including a link to an old documentary from the Forest Service of the history of the Beartooth Highway, and it's fascinating on many levels, both low and high. So then he segues a bit back into discussing Phaedrus's lateral drift, meaning this transition period of exploration. And this period will rather logically end up in a decision for him to pursue a PhD in philosophy. He discovered that the science he'd once thought of as the whole world of knowledge, 26 letters can 26 letters really describe reality? As the whole world of knowledge is only a branch of philosophy, which is far broader and far more general. The questions he has asked about the infinite hypotheses hadn't been of interest to science because they weren't scientific questions. Science cannot study scientific method without getting into a bootstrap problem that destroys the validity of his answers. Okay, back to the Beartooth Highway. The highlight of the Beartooth Highway is a spectacular plateau called Beartooth Pass. It is a place of high elevation. The elevation is 10,947 feet, to be exact. And it is so high that the flora struggles to survive. It is a place of such high elevation that it's kind of empty, high and empty. It is a void, let's just say. So I want to invoke a concept from Zen Buddhism, emptiness. It's a plane of nothing and everything. Let's just say absolute potential. Soon stunted pines disappear entirely and we're in alpine meadows. There's not a tree anywhere. Only grass everywhere filled with little pink and blue and white dots of intense color. Wildflowers everywhere. These and grasses and mosses and lichens are all that can live here now. We've reached the high country above the timberline. People spend their entire lives at these lower altitudes without any awareness of that this high country exists. So again, the metaphor of contrast. What follows is a beautiful description of beauty, light emerging from darkness. The tiny pink and blue and yellow and white ones which seem to pop out, sun brilliant from the black shadows. Everywhere it's like this. Little pins of colored light shoot forth to me from a background of somber dark green and black. Dark sky now and cold, except where the sun hits. On the sun side, my arm and leg and jacket are hot, but on the dark side, in deep shadows, it is very cold. This is important contrast. So, and just, be aware of these. So notice how everything in this first section is about a transition from an average way to an elevated way. Average thinking, so to speak. Let's just say scientific to something else. Average topography of the lowlands to the profoundly dramatic topography of Beartooth Pass. The high elevation, the lowlands of the mind, and the high country of the mind. So let's revisit a statement from Einstein where the term comes from in the last chapter. A finely tempered nature longs to escape from his noisy, cramped surroundings into the silence of the high mountains, where the eye ranges freely through the still, pure air and fondly traces out the restful contours, apparently built for eternity. Beartooth Pass. So, a viewer who prefers to remain anonymous has taken the Zen and the art of motorcycle maintenance route on a motorcycle himself. So he has made some observations about this topography and the symbolism. There is a nuance in Zen and the art of motorcycle maintenance that is extraordinarily brilliant. Consider the following from Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. At Red Lodge, the roads almost joined to the base of the mountain. The dark, ominous mass beyond dominates even the roofs of the buildings on either side of the main street. The description of the mountains from Red Lodge is quite a stretch. They are certainly a dominant part of the landscape from Red Lodge, but I have never felt anything close to what he described, says this viewer. I believe Pirsig was up to something else entirely, which underlies much of Zen in the art of motorcycle maintenance. Who or what was Phaedrus? I think Pirsig used the expression dark, ominous mass to describe his shadow self. Phaedrus, the narrator, the conscious mind, was the sun side, and Phaedrus was the shadow side that emerged in dreams and in these memory fragments. What the viewer is saying is that the way it's described has artistic license. It is described in this way to mean something specific about the significance of Phaedrus, who's now being remembered. So in Jungian dream analysis, and in Jungian analysis in general, your shadow is where the missing is to be found, the solution to problems, the parts of you that you need that are undeveloped, the deficits. This is emerging in the narrator's dreams and in these memory fragments. So this viewer goes on to say, the summit is where the shadow and the sun meet, which is another reason why Beartooth Pass is so significant. The highway takes an almost north-south route across the mountain. You can say Beartooth Pass is the relationship between shadow and sun, unconscious and conscious. The beautiful art at the summit is the working of our shadow, the unconscious self. Yes. In the final analysis, it makes no difference whether or not he actually spent significant time on the mountain, specifically on the shadow side. What matters is the meaning of the mountain, the narrator, and Phaedrus, which makes the pass all the more extraordinary. I agree. So thanks to this viewer for his great insight and assistance in creating this reading video, giving me a lot to think about, sharing his experiences of the trip for this first part of Chapter 11. So I hope this made sense, and I will see you next Sunday for Chapter 11, Part 2.